He drove the same routes every night, picking up drunk college kids and tired shift workers. What his passengers didn't know was that the old taxi driver scanning the rearview mirror wasn't just checking traffic. He was using skills that once kept Apache helicopters from getting shot down over enemy territory. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden skills and quiet heroism, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. The yellow cab sat idling outside Murphy's bar on 5th Street, its engine humming quietly in the October night. Behind the wheel, Charlie Reeves adjusted his rearview mirror for the third time in 5 minutes, not because it was out of place, but because old habits never really die. At 64, Charlie looked like every other night shift taxi driver in the city. Gray hair, reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck, a thermos of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. His cab was clean but worn, with seat covers that had seen better decades and a radio that crackled with dispatcher calls and driver complaints. What his passengers didn't see was how Charlie's eyes moved constantly, scanning intersections, noting license plates, memorizing faces, how he positioned his mirrors to eliminate blind spots, how he kept mental notes of every police patrol route and emergency response time in his sector. 30 years of flying helicopters in places where a moment's inattention meant falling out of the sky had taught him that survival was about seeing everything before everything saw you. Cab 47, pick up at Murphy's, crackled the radio. Charlie keyed the mic. 47 responding. The passenger who climbed into the back seat was typical for a Thursday night. Mid-20s, suit wrinkled from a long day, phone pressed to his ear, barely acknowledging Charlie's existence. Airport, the man said, still talking into his phone, and step on it. My flight leaves in an hour. Charlie pulled away from the curb, automatically noting the black SUV that had been parked across the street for the past 20 minutes. Same vehicle, same spot, engine running. In his flying days, that kind of detail would have gone into a mission report. Now it just went into the mental file cabinet he couldn't seem to turn off. So you think this city's safe? The passenger asked, finally off his call. Charlie glanced in the rearview mirror. Depends on where you go and when you go there. Ever had any trouble? Robberies, carjackings, that kind of thing? Not particularly, Charlie said, taking a left onto 7th Avenue. What he didn't mention was the .45 in the glove compartment, the tactical flashlight mounted under the dashboard, or the emergency radio that could reach police, fire, and medical services on frequencies most people didn't know existed. They were passing the warehouse district when Charlie noticed the headlights. Same black SUV from Murphy's, 3 cars back, matching his speed perfectly. When Charlie took the next right, the SUV followed. When he slowed for a red light, it slowed too. When the light changed and Charlie accelerated, the SUV kept pace. Charlie's passenger was busy with his phone again, oblivious. But Charlie's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel as muscle memory kicked in. Evasion patterns, threat assessment, tactical positioning, all the skills he'd used to keep helicopters alive in hostile airspace. We're taking a little detour, Charlie said calmly. His passenger looked up. What? No, I told you. I have a flight to catch. Trust me, Charlie said, making a sudden right turn into an industrial area. Won't take long. The SUV followed. Charlie made 3 more turns, each one more abrupt than the last. The SUV stayed with them, its intentions now unmistakable. In the rearview mirror, Charlie could see 2 figures in the front seat, the passenger holding something that reflected the streetlights in a way that made his blood run cold. What the hell are you doing? His passenger demanded, finally noticing the tension. Staying alive, Charlie said, reaching for the radio under his dashboard. Not the taxi company frequency, but the emergency band he'd had installed years ago. This is civilian Charlie Reeves, requesting immediate police response to the warehouse district off Industrial Boulevard. Two suspects in a black SUV. Appears to be an attempted carjacking in progress. His passenger's eyes went wide. Carjacking? Stay down, Charlie said, his voice carrying an authority that hadn't been there moments before. And hold on. What happened next was 30 years of tactical flying compressed into 60 seconds of precision driving. Charlie knew these streets the way he'd once known flight patterns over Baghdad. Every alley, every dead end, every place where the narrow roads would work in his favor. He accelerated suddenly, taking a hard left into a loading dock area where the SUV's size would be a disadvantage. The pursuers tried to follow, but Charlie had already calculated the physics. He spun the taxi into a controlled slide, using a technique he'd learned flying helicopters in crosswinds, positioning his vehicle so the SUV would have to stop or risk a collision with a concrete loading barrier. The SUV stopped. Two men got out, and Charlie could see the weapons in their hands clearly now, but instead of fear, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the cold clarity that came from being exactly where his training had prepared him to be. "Stay in the car," he told his passenger, keying the emergency radio again. Two suspects on foot, armed northwest corner of the loading area. ETA on that response? "Charlie, this is dispatch. Units are 2 minutes out. Are you safe?" "Affirmative," Charlie said, watching the men approach in his mirrors. "Suspects are funneled into a kill zone with no escape routes. They picked the wrong driver tonight." The men with guns were 50 feet away when the first police car rounded the corner, its spotlight cutting through the darkness like a blade. Then another. Then a third. What the would-be carjackers found wasn't a cornered taxi driver, but a carefully orchestrated trap designed by someone who'd spent 3 decades turning hopeless situations into successful missions. 20 minutes later, after the suspects were in custody and the paperwork was started, Sergeant Linda Morrison walked over to Charlie's cab. "Reeves," she said, shaking her head with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "Should have known. Clean intercept, perfect positioning, textbook tactical communication. Where'd a taxi driver learn to do that?" Charlie adjusted his rearview mirror one more time and smiled. "Army, helicopter pilot. Flew medevac and combat rescue for 30 years. Morrison nodded slowly. "That explains the radio setup, the positioning, the way you herded them into the trap. You flew them right into our response zone." "Old habits," Charlie said simply. His passenger, who had been silent through the entire encounter, finally spoke up. You used to fly helicopters?" "Still do," Charlie said, patting the steering wheel of his taxi. "Just closer to the ground now." The passenger stared at him for a moment, then said quietly, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "Most people don't," Charlie said, starting the engine. "And that's fine. Sometimes the best way to serve is to blend in until you're needed." They made it to the airport with 10 minutes to spare. As his passenger got out, he handed Charlie a $100 bill for a $20 ride. "Thank you," he said. "Not just for the ride. For everything." Charlie nodded and pulled away, already scanning his mirrors, already watching the traffic patterns, already ready for whatever the night might bring next. Word spread quickly through the taxi company after that. Drivers started asking Charlie for advice on routes, on safety, on how to handle difficult situations. The dispatchers began routing the problem calls to Cab 47, knowing that Charlie Reeves could handle whatever came his way. But Charlie never made a big deal about it. To him, it was just another mission completed successfully. He'd spent his career getting people out of dangerous situations and bringing them home safe. The only difference now was that home was usually the airport or a hotel or their apartment building instead of a military base. The skills were the same. The mission was the same. The oath to protect was the same. A few weeks later, a local news station ran a story about the incident. They called Charlie a hero, but he turned down their interview request. Heroes, he said, were were the men and women still flying missions overseas. He was just a taxi driver who happened to know how to read a map. But his fellow drivers knew better. The police knew better. And late at night, when the city got dangerous and someone needed a ride through the worst neighborhoods, they knew exactly which cab to call. Charlie Reeves never advertised his past. He never wore his medals or displayed his commendations. He just drove his routes, picked up his fares, and watched his mirrors with the eyes of someone who'd spent 3 decades making sure the good guys made it home. Because that's what you do when you've sworn an oath to serve. You don't stop serving when you retire. You just find new ways to keep people safe. Some people pilot helicopters. Others pilot taxis. But a pilot is a pilot, and a mission is a mission. And Charlie Reeves had never failed to complete a mission yet. So the next time you climb into a taxi driven by someone who seems to know every street in the city, who positions their mirrors just right, who stays calm when trouble starts, remember Charlie Reeves. Remember that sometimes the most experienced pilot in the sky is the one driving you home on the ground. Have you ever met someone like Charlie? Someone whose skills from a past life showed up exactly when they were needed most? Share their story in the comments below. Tell us how they made you feel safer, just by being there. Thank you for watching The Human Stories. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who believes in quiet guardians. Because the world needs more people like Charlie Reeves, veterans who never stop serving, even when their service takes a different form. Until next time, remember that courage doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears a taxi driver's cap and carries a thermos of cold coffee. But it's always watching the mirrors, always ready, always bringing people home safe.